This is the Sandman podcast on TV Podcast Industries. We're back. We're discussing The Dead Boy Detectives, Episode 1, The Case of Crystal Palace.
Right then, I'm Edwin Payne. This is Charles Rowland. As you no doubt know, we are the Dead Boy Detective Agency. He's the brains, I'm the brawn. Getting things done.
You are the brawn.
Yeah? Why'd you say it like that?
No reason. I would like you to help my friend, Crystal. She's a psychic, you see, a medium, so she can see me even though I'm a ghost. But lately, something has been odd.
Welcome back, fellow dreamers, to the Sandman podcast on TV Podcast Industries. We are chatting about The Dead Boy Detectives of the first episode, The Case of Crystal Palace. I'm one of your Dead Boy Detectives, Derek.
Hello there, fellow dreamers. Good to be back in the world of dreams and crusty, sandy nuggets in the corner of your eye. I am one of your other hosts, John.
I forgot that you'd gotten into that whole thing during our Sandman podcast coverage as well. This might seem a little bit odd to those of you jumping into the Dead Boy Detectives for the first time on Netflix, but this is in the universe of the Sandman, and they don't hold back in that in the first episode here.
No, we see Death again.
We do.
The same person who played Death in The Sandman.
Yes, Kirby Hale Baptiste, now just calling herself Kirby, according to the credits of the show. But yes, Death is back here from the Sandman universe. So we'll talk a lot about that as we get into the podcast. But that's the reason why we're covering the Dead Boy Detectives on TV Podcast Industry, because it is in the same world of Neil Gaiman's Sandman, one of my favourite universes in all of comicdom.
Most definitely. But this is certainly, dare I say it, more chipper.
It is. It is definitely. Apart from the fact that Death appears in the first episode. It is a bit more chipper.
But the main protagonists here, which is Edwin and Charles, certainly kind of, more youthful dynamic, more chipper. And so, a different vibe, I think, at least for now, at least from this first episode.
Exactly, a lot less dour than Morpheus, the Sandman, who was trapped for 100 years as well. So yes,
but from the same universe. Would you like to explain that?
I'll talk about it a little bit. We'll obviously get into full spoiler-filled details as we go into the episode. But the two characters did appear in the Sandman comic book in a storyline that hasn't been adapted for Netflix just yet from the Sandman. It would have been coming up in season 2 of the Sandman TV show.
Okay, yeah.
So that's quite interesting. But yes, both of them died in mysterious circumstances and didn't pass on to hell or heaven, whichever place they were going to go to. Eventually, they were taken out of the Sandman universe, and another writer took them on board to bring them into starring roles in their own comic book series called The Dead Boy Detectives, where the two of them investigate crimes that are affecting ghosts and affecting other people that haven't left this realm, I suppose.
Yeah, and interestingly for me, because of course, fellow dreamers, if you had been following our Sandman podcast, I mean, I absolutely adore Neil Gaiman and the stuff I've read, but I have never read The Sandman. And even with the time that has passed, I still haven't actually read it. So I certainly haven't read the Dead Boy Detectives kind of issue where they're introduced in the Sandman comics. But it does feel familiar to me, this, whether it's just obviously the detective agency doing case by case. So, I mean, not saying that it is the X-Files in the sense, but I mean, that was one of my favorite shows. So I really kind of like that element to it. But it's also, the idea of investigating the supernatural, even though they are supernatural themselves, is, a really interesting premise. And I've enjoyed stuff like the one with Nick Frost and Simon Pegg, Truth Seekers, which was on Amazon Prime.
That's right, in Prime Video.
Similarly investigating the supernatural and so on. So, I'm kind of looking forward to watching this.
Yeah, and I know you've mentioned one particular word and one particular phrase a few times there, supernatural, which is a show that did this to a massive level, where you had the two brothers investigating the supernatural across 15 seasons of shows. So Dead Boy Detectives could absolutely go for a long time. There's loads of possibilities there when you have mysterious goings on that can be investigated by the supernatural. And one of the things that did come across in the show is how much lore a show like Supernatural has given into the world and is being used in shows like The Dead Boy Detectives and Truth Seekers, where you have, these mysterious tomes of books which will guide you to how to get rid of spirits or guide you how to get rid of demons.
Well, that's it. There are certain rules that must be obeyed.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely. And one other quick connection that I will say as well, and I did notice it on viewing The Dead Boy Detectives the first and second time, I went back and watched a bit of The Sandman, and don't forget, in this universe that we've already seen on Netflix, we've had Joanna Constantine, who is someone that works the supernatural and deals with demons all the time as well. So we've already seen that in the Sandman universe, and these Dead Boy Detectives are using similar skills that she would have used as well. So maybe we can get a crossover with Joanna Constantine come back into this show at some point.
That would be really
She's
cool.
around. She's in the world.
Absolutely. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
But before we get on with our spoiler-filled discussion of episode 1 of The Dead Boy Detectives, a reminder to our fellow returning dreamers and, of course, our new dreamers as well, to pop on over to our website at tvpodcastindustries.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast on any good or evil podcast player of your choice. Mm-hmm. We are also over on Facebook, over on our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries, where we leave a spoiler post for each and every episode of our coverage of The Dead Boy Detectives.
Yes.
Because we love getting your feedback as well.
Absolutely.
So you can leave comments, thoughts, theories, or observations on every episode of The Dead Boy Detectives over on our Facebook group, or you can send in an email to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com.
Absolutely, you can. And one of the things we will say, of course, there's a Netflix show, all the episodes coming out the same day. I've actually pre-scheduled all 8 feedback posts to come out 1 an hour on the day that the show comes out on Netflix. So there will be a post available for you, whatever way you're watching the series. If you're sitting down for 8 hours binging it, or if you're watching one a week, pop back in there on our Facebook group and leave us feedback on each of the episodes. The way we'll be covering it for TV Podcast Industries, we'll be looking at the first episode this week, and we'll be looking at 2 episodes a week for the rest of the show, and then closing it out with the finale of the season with our coverage of that in 1 episode. So in total, we will have, what's that, John? 5 episodes?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, 5 episodes. That's what my math says anyway. So we'd love to hear from you as we go through the season and how you're watching it. But just try not to spoil us. If you want to send us feedback, if you binged the whole thing and want to send us feedback on the whole series, just mark it on your feedback that it is for the whole series, and we'll discuss it as those episodes come up.
So, kicking off with our spoiler-filled discussion, Derek, who gave us what, where, when, and how?
Ooh. Yes, it is all given to us by the ghostly presences. No, this, of course, is based on characters created by Neil Gaiman and Matt Wagner. As I mentioned, Neil Gaiman wrote the original Sandman comics, which is where the characters came from originally, and then Matt Wagner took them on board and created the detective agency and did the spin-off series. So some of the characters here are coming from his creation as well. The show was created for television by Steve Yockey. He was a writer and executive producer on Supernatural.
Ooh, good pedigree.
Yeah, and also wrote the Doom Patrol Season 3, Episode 3 episode, which featured the first live-action appearance of these characters, the Dead Boy Detectives. At the time, in that show, they were played by Ty Tennant, who we know from House of the Dragon,
yes,
and son of David Tennant, and played by Sebastian Croft, who we know from Heartstopper, and as the voice in Hogwarts Legacy.
Yes,
well.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And there is a little bit of Heartstopper in this, which we'll come to later.
There certainly is. Yep, there certainly is. Steve Yockey is also the co-showrunner alongside Beth Schwartz, who was formerly the showrunner on Arrow.
Ooh, I'm guessing a Greg Berlanti connection here.
You would be correct. The executive producer of the show is Greg Berlanti, so he is another major executive producer for this show.
Very good.
Yeah. This has gone through so many changes. As I mentioned, the Doom Patrol episode where the 2 characters were introduced, that was supposed to be what they call a backdoor pilot for a series going on to HBO Max or going on to CW at the time,
yep,
I think, which would have featured those 2 characters continuing their story on. It's just made so many different changes have happened over the years with that service, with those shows. So this Netflix version now features Neil Gaiman as being an executive producer on the show as well, and this brand new cast starting off their journey with this story in the first episode.
Excellent stuff.
Episode 1 is written by Steve Yockey, the co-showrunner for the show, and the episode was directed by Lee Toland Krieger, who worked on one of your favourite shows, John. He was director on Shadow and Bone.
Very good.
Did 2 episodes in that show.
Good stuff.
Yeah, also worked in Greg Berlanti's universe, working on Superman and Lois, which he directed 2 episodes of, and The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Did 2 episodes of that as well.
Oh, I quite like that, actually.
Yeah.
I was a massive Sabrina the Teenage Witch fan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was it. The first season or 2 were very interesting of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina.
Well,
very different to what you were expecting, I think.
But I enjoyed it. Maybe I was more a Salem the Cat fan, actually. I liked his sarcastic wit.
From the original one.
Yes, from the original.
Yes, of course. But John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for the first episode of Dead Boy Detectives, The Case of Crystal Palace?
Sure. Meet the Dead Boy detectives. Edwin is the brains and Charles the brawn. They've escaped from the afterlife to help restless spirits in the mortal realm. After coming to the aid of a teen medium with a demonic dilemma, Edwin and Charles head to America to find a missing girl.
So right off the bat, the show does drop you straight into the action, doesn't it?
Certainly does, yes.
Yeah. I love those opening shots of London, the drone shots of London City. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. Love those aerial shots of London. And certainly at night with all the lights and so on, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a fun opening. I think the first episode we're going to be covering slightly differently than the later episodes, because the later episodes are mostly a case that we're going to be looking at. But we will talk about our case notes or our major moments from the episode, the top moments that we enjoyed from the episode. So let's start out with Running from Death, which is the opening of the episode.
Our case note number 1.
Exactly. As we have the 2 boys dropping out of the air into the middle of London and being chased down by a gas-masked soldier from World War I. I thought this was a really exciting opening.
Yeah, I thought this was really cool, actually. It just felt really kinetic, good sort of thinking on their feet of both Edwin and Charles as they're effectively running away from the World War I veteran with the gas mask, hired by another ghost at the museum because effectively the gas mask was cursed and was aggravating the spirit inside and aggravating this particular ghost. So I kind of really enjoyed this. We also see kind of one of their first little tricks as well, which is the ability to jump through mirrors so that they can travel between mirrors. So it was a good job that a massive mirror was being carried at the dead of night through sort of the Greenwich Naval Academy, I guess. I
think it is, yeah.
So that seemed to be where it was.
Wasn't that where Thor... The Dark World had a scene there, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah. So basically, our 2 heroes in Edwin and Charles can mirror hop, go mirror hopping in order to travel or to escape sort of attack by this marauding, sort of seemingly very angry World War I veteran.
Yes, yeah. We'll, I'm sure, get more detail on this as the series goes on, but I think it's Edwin that's the one that's able to do the mirror hopping and bring Charles through with him. I think that's what it is. He does he's kind of able to map the directions between the mirror worlds, I guess, where he wants to get to, because he's being given out to by Charles for not putting him in the right place. But I loved the actual shot itself where he arrives, falls on the floor, or lands on the floor properly. Charles arrives behind him and falls to the floor. And then we see this gas mask soldier arrive perfectly doing his superhero landing as he arrives, and they thought, oh, hang on a second, maybe this will confuse him by jumping to a different place. Thought that was really fun. But we see that Charles also has an ability here as well. He has his bottomless backpack, kind of like Hermione's sack that she carries around in Harry Potter, where she can fit the entire world inside. Same thing here with Charles. But of course, he's forgotten the one book that they need.
Exactly.
To take
and we find out it's ultimately a contained micro universe.
Yes. Yeah.
But he has forgotten a very important implement, which is a knife, so that they can get this cursed gas mask off the soldier. Yeah, I like this, and I like that they had to hop again to get to their office so that they could get the knife, but again are followed by the soldier.
Yep.
And I in the end it became a little bit gory. I didn't really know what to expect.
Yeah.
Where the pitch for this was going to be, because as I say, in essence they're quite chipper, but here we actually have quite a dark opening where the soldier grabs Charles by the neck, has him on the floor, and they managed to get the cursed gas mask off him. And whilst Edwin's doing the incantation to destroy it, you just see the blood and the deathly face attacking Charles, and the blood dripping on him. And I was like, okay, so they're not going to necessarily pull from having some blood and showing, maybe the scenes that you would expect them not to if it was being pitched at a slightly younger age. As I say, I had no idea really where this was going to be pitched, to be honest. So I found myself sort of getting into this even more. But as I say, I think the opening is just really, really kinetic, and I really enjoyed it. But eventually they do manage to get the gas mask off. But have to then hightail it out of their office and hide on the window ledge because death is arriving. And ultimately, this is where we begin to understand that they are trying to avoid death. They've, in a sense, gotten lost in the afterlife.
Yes.
And so are concerned that if death catches up with them, they then will get assigned to wherever they go. But we do hear from a bit later in the episode, because we do have a flashback to Edwin.
Yes.
Where he was in hell for decades. Effectively an administrative error, is how he describes it.
I wanted to just talk about this one really quickly, because this is one that is from his origin story in the Sandman comic book. We do know that the reason why Edwin is dead is because he was effectively almost kidnapped by other students in his school. He's a queer kid. He's a kid that hasn't come to the realization of what his sexuality is in the comic book issue. We're not aware of it, but he's considered a soft kid by the other bullies that are in the school. And it's quite harrowing as a gay guy reading those comic books at the time. I was having it's almost palpitations reading the story of him being taken at night, dragged upstairs, and then used as a human sacrifice by these boys who don't really know what they're doing. They're practicing with demonology effectively. And he dies in this situation, struggling and screaming. And in this scene, I think as you mentioned a moment ago, John, the tone of it is kind of hard to pin down. Are they trying to make it a jokey, upbeat show for 15-year-olds, or are they trying to deal with some of the demonology aspects and the language that you would have for an adult show? Are they trying to make it align it with the adult concepts that were in the Sandman? It's difficult to pin down. But the fact that they turned it into a joke in the episode with the demon talking to him going, "Oh, sorry, kid, you were a human sacrifice after all, off you go to hell," and it's dealt with as an administrative error. Me flashing back to when I was 14 years old, reading that story and it feeling very harrowing what happened to poor Edwin at the time. I'm suddenly going, you've put that into the TV show and it feels completely different in tone to how I had read it at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I can get that. I do get the sense, though, that Edwin, this really riles him. So I'm sensing that it will play out through the series
I think so.
To some extent.
I hope so. Yeah.
I think the other thing that's important on that front is that Edwin is from the Edwardian period. So he was in boarding school. It happened in boarding school in 1916. Whereas Charles is from the 1980s. He's effectively dressed as a punk.
I think so. Yeah.
Kind of,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I say the balance. I like the balance here of it. I mean, okay, I don't have the reference of the Sandman comic, but I kind of enjoyed the demon Saal coming down and taking him to hell on a technicality, because effectively he was sacrificed, so he had to do that. I think at
least he takes out all the bullies,
but
which was good.
I think you can see that the whole thing riles him up. He does say, he's spent 70 years in hell, basically on a technicality. So I think that you definitely see his irritation of what happened and how it happened. Not necessarily him understanding why it happened, but possibly not fully, as you say, really coming to grips with that bullying that was being done. I'm sure he absolutely has that sense of it, but maybe not being completely open about it.
Absolutely.
So coming back to their office, we see Death arrive to collect this soul of the soldier, who, now that the gas mask has been destroyed, the sort of injured features have gone, the blood has gone. And interestingly, Death calls him Wilfred, and I'm wondering that whether this is supposed to be a World War I poet called Wilfred Owen, so a war poet. I remember in school, just because you have that really quite nice moment where he asks, am I being reincarnated, and talks about a Rudyard Kipling poem from India. And the whole idea of reincarnation, which is such a big part of Hinduism. And I just love the fact that Death says, well, now you'll find out, where is Wilfred going to go? So,
we had a lot of praise for Kirby Helvet Keist's version of Death and how she was handled in Sandman. And it feels like, once again, this is another one of those great scenes. She has all the love in her face when she sees Wilfred. She says to him, do you not want to rest now? It's 100 years since he died. It's time to move on. And again, I love that line where he asks her, what will be in the beyond for me? It's something that was again recurred quite a lot in the Sandman comics, people coming to her with their opinions of what they're going to see in the next life or after they die. And her response is always the same. Now it's your time. Now's when you find out. Now's when you get to solve the mystery of the great mystery. You're going to see what it is that happens after you die, and she never gives any indication of what it's going to be. So always like that. So great to see her back as the crossover character of the first episode. But as you say, this sets up the impetus for Edwin and Charles all the time. She's been to their office. Death has been there. The thing they've been trying to avoid now, in Edwin's case for over 100 years, in Charles's case for almost 40 years, they've been trying to avoid Death, and she's been here. She's been in their office. So Edwin calls that out quite a lot from then on. What if she saw something here that will indicate that we're here, and then she just comes and collects our souls and I go back to hell? So they're now kind of on the run, or kind of going into hiding when they get a new client, which kind of brings us on to our case note number 2, the brand new case for the boys.
Yes, Crystal and the little girl with the glowing magical squid. This is, I guess introducing us to the third member of, or reluctant member of, or accidental member of,
yes, I'd say accidental,
the Dead Boy Detectives, which is actually a girl called Crystal Palace, and who is a psychic who can see ghosts, and it's one of her friends, Emma, who is a Victorian girl who wants to help her friend Crystal, because she's become possessed by a demon, who we find out his name is David.
Yes,
David the demon. Yep. So I kind of really like this. I like the hardball play of her coming to get this case, see if Edwin and Charles will take the case. Charles kind of says, well, this is where you'll play hardball. And she goes, well, I'm just a young girl. And he goes, yes, you're a young girl, but from the Victorian period. Exactly. Technically, you've lived longer in the ghost realm than I have, and you're able to conjure up a glowing squid.
Exactly.
So you have means.
You've probably figured out a way to live in the ghost world for this amount of time. So I really liked it. That's a good play, and made the whole scene funny. I also like the little touch of her going, she used to be a bit, and it cuts to a scene of the two of them playing together in a cemetery, and now she's a bit, and then it cuts to Crystal eating out of a bin, basically. So it's like very different character, but I like that little touch. So it sets them on the path of finding out who Crystal is, and that's their case for the start of this episode. So we get to see them taking up a case.
Yeah, scouting out Crystal.
Yeah.
But ultimately then sort of going to trap the demon with runes on the tube train.
Mm-hmm.
I like the fact that firstly they kind of threw you with the two clown twins.
Yeah.
So you're going, okay, there's the disguises that they were talking about.
Yeah.
And then the fact that they get off and Crystal is still there, and you're going, okay, and you see that they disguise themselves as the living, so that they can actually be seen by Crystal.
Exactly.
And it's just kind of like a cloud on them, that they kind of just waft it away from. And I kind of thought that was a really cool effect, as well as then when they tried to exorcise the demon with the runes, with the demon fighting back, and you have the whole London Underground tube train turning as the demon tries to escape, pulling fish through a vortex in order to wash away the runes that they'd drawn on the tube's floor.
But I like that they'd also brought along the sheet, so they kind of topped and bottomed the demon by putting the sheet on top and the runes underneath, and then I thought a very funny moment of when the demon David finally escapes. He runs off with the sheet in his head like an old ghost in an old movie. I just thought that was a funny little joke as he runs out of the tube.
That was a great little gag, actually. I thought, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
but the aftermath of that is that Crystal can't access or her memories of her family and certain other things, and so stays with Edwin and Charles while she recovers. But again, it sets up a nice little moment with, effectively Edwin doesn't want Crystal to be there, whereas Charles is the one that's saying, she needs to stay with us until her memories come back. I mean, effectively really saying we actually haven't solved the case yet.
Right, yes.
Of Crystal.
Yeah.
Because of her memories being lost.
Yeah, and because she's a medium, she can see both Edwin and Charles even when they're in their ghostly form. But there's much more to it, isn't there? Obviously, Charles is kind of going, well, it's a teenage girl, someone around our own age, finally able to communicate with her, someone different. Edwin is much more insular about their relationship between himself and Charles. He's very happy with the fact that it's just been the two of them for almost 3 decades.
Yeah.
That the two of them have been working together and been side by side with each other. He's really enjoying that. So he doesn't want some outsider coming in and breaking into it. Especially not a gruff American.
This is the insertion of a new friend into an established friendship.
Exactly.
Or possibly more.
Yeah.
At least from Edwin's side. Yeah. That has, let's say, at least at this moment, unsettled Edwin.
Exactly. And not only that, let's get on to our next point, because not only that, in our next case note, Crystal really interrupts the situation here. Not only is she possibly going to be staying in their place where death was just there a couple of days ago, so they need to be really careful about everything that's going on. Not only that, she picks up their post from the spiritual postman who's just dropped off the post, and finds a new case for them. And this new case is a missing girl in America. So
I like the fact here that she's able to pick up on the magic from the cases. So like she says that, she's reading it, and, it's not the same thing as Edwin and Charles. As a medium, she's kind of getting senses thrown at her from, in this case, she picks up a missing girl leaflet, that she suddenly says she's caught in a dark place. She's still alive. And it is the Beck Aspen case, out in, Jefferson County in the USA. Our case note number 3 going to America.
Exactly.
And I love the fact that then it cuts to them getting off a boat in Jefferson County in Washington in the US.
Yep. And
you still have Edwin saying, well, we could have just mirror hopped effectively to here, but 2 planes, a train and a boat and so on. You know, it's taken us 3 days to get here.
Exactly.
And, you know, he's still kind of whinging and making Crystal the focus of why he's whinging.
We could have been here in 2 seconds,
yeah, exactly.
But because we had to deal with a stupid live human, here we are on, well, I think it's actually just 3 planes and a ferry, I think is the title that pops up on the screen, that's made them come here to Jefferson. But they have to have Crystal be the lead on this as they get there. She needs to go and find somewhere to live while they're there. She sets up the place that they're going to set up their office while they're investigating this case effectively. So we meet all of our other new characters as they go to the Tongue and Tail Butchers to rent out an apartment from Jenny.
Yeah, I loved how morbid this was, actually.
Totally.
And I have to say, Jenny the Butcher, the owner of Tongue and Tail, I don't know what it is about her. I just love just her whole demeanor.
Yes.
And vibe, I guess. It's just really, really good. Yeah. Basically, and I love the fact the introduction is she's using a butcher's cleaver, chopping up meat, and walks through when the bell goes on the door with the cleaver.
Yes.
And you have it kind of all getting a little bit tense and nervous amongst them. Or why is she coming through here with a cleaver?
Yeah.
And as she is showing Crystal to the room, she's still got the cleaver. And it's like they go into her neighbor's room to see who it was. She goes, well, we're looking for a murderer. There could be a murderer here. Yeah. And the owner holds a cleaver, you know, kind of, whether it was protection or not, I don't know, but Jenny is really, I just really liked the vibe in this first episode of Jenny, and almost a weary look, you know,
absolutely,
kind of just, okay, tell me what you want, and I'll see if I can do it, but, you know, don't make me try too hard, almost.
Yeah, I kind of get that. I think there's also a little bit of the, it feels like from the fact that we meet the other tenant in Jenny's place, it kind of feels like she's the type of person that takes in a lot of waifs and strays. So she's maybe a little bit world weary of having another young girl coming in like Crystal here, obviously down her luck, saying she can't afford any other place in the town. Can she put her up? And I think Jenny's kind of going, oh, here we go again. This poor thing. I'll put her up in the room here. So there's maybe a little bit of, oh no, not again kind of thing, but I don't think it's out of a lack of love from Jenny. I think she's just going, oh, I hope this kid's all right, basically.
Yeah,
so
no, absolutely.
So I do like her a lot.
And she points to her neighbor, who is Nico. We don't see Nico at this stage, but Edwin and Charles pop their head through the door to make sure that Crystal and themselves aren't also living next door to a murderer in any way. But the investigation then that they begin here in the US is to go and ask the missing girl's parents questions, so Crystal can effectively read the situation, get a sense of what's happened. I like the effect where her eyes go white when it shows Crystal connecting with those senses and to the spirit of the missing girl, Becky.
Yeah.
Just a nice little effect, a little bit spooky as well. So I kind of like that. And it comes back to a pair of trainers that are in police lockup, and that they found those, and again, whether she can read the trainers to get a sense of where Becky may have been. Yeah. And again, I like the fact that this comes to the tension between Crystal and Edwin again, where it's like, well, how are we going to get these from police lockup? And he just jumps through a mirror and brings
them in 2 seconds.
You know, because there's been this whole conversation from Charles saying, look, you know, she's a really big help here. Imagine if we'd had that on, you know, one of the previous cases. And Edwin's like, yeah, but not always, because I can jump through a mirror hop and get this straight from the police lockup without having to do disguises and so on. The other side of that, when he comes back with the trainers, is that, again, one of the other rules here is that iron makes them vulnerable as ghosts and makes them solid for a few moments, so it burns them. So we see that Edwin has picked up a burn from the metal iron bars. So I like that this then progresses this investigation when she reads these runners and finds that they were last worn at the front of a house.
Yes.
That they go and then scope out.
Absolutely. I like that you've turned it into reading the runners. It almost seems like, I think Edwin even says it. He's like, so are you going to speak to the trainers now? So it's like, no, I'm not speaking to the trainers. I'm just learning their last position from my medium abilities. But that is what leads them to the discovery of where Becky is. And Becky's with the witch Esther.
Yes. And they find that out through the medium of cats.
Yes.
Which I kind of like this, where Edwin starts talking to the cat, and, we're told here that cats are tricky, but I just love the fact that the cats are completely foul-mouthed.
Oh, totally.
Or this cat is, at least.
And I think that's kind of, it's indicative again of the Sandman universe. We had an entire episode of, at least half of an episode in the last season in Sandman, which was dedicated to cats talking to each other and having voices. So here we have Edwin being able to speak to a cat here, having the conversation with him, and then using magic to get the information out of him. It's funny, isn't it? Like we're cat owners, as a lot of our listeners will know. And I always remember the suggestion coming to me that when we wanted to exercise our cat, because he was getting a bit too weighty, I was being told by lots of people, get a leash and bring him for a walk. And I'm going, you can't put a leash on a cat. I've seen people do it now, but at the time, a couple of years ago, when people were suggesting it, telling me to put a leash on my cat, I was going, just don't do that to a cat.
No, and we still don't.
We still don't. We still haven't. But I've seen other people with leashes on their cats, and I presume you start that with that when they're a kitten. But here, Edwin using the leash on this stray cat to get the information out of him. To me, again, as a cat owner who would never do that to their cat, I can see why the cat's getting really angry about it. It does feel like that kind of intrusive magic power that Edwin's just used to get the information that he wants out of the cat.
Well, that's it. And again, a few more rules here. As to whether they may be important moving forward, I don't know, but that sort of almost lasso of truth that Edwin uses, where it forces the cat to talk about the witch Esther and who the house belongs to. That's not looked on favourably by cat kind, effectively. He says there's implications for what you're doing here, mate, kind of thing. Also, with obtaining the runners, there is this talk that maybe they would possess someone, but that throws up flags in the afterlife if a ghost possesses a living being. That is going to cause alarm bells in, I guess, hell or somewhere in the afterlife. He's kind of gone off and done this on his own because him and Charles and Crystal, they've kind of had a falling out, really. Edwin is disengaged here. Crystal, in the meantime, has gone back to the apartment where she actually meets Nico, and you get all of a sudden this Heartstopper moment.
Yes,
with
you do.
The pink background and the butterflies and flowers and so on.
Instantly thinking of Heartstopper because Netflix, I think, used that GIF every week on their social media accounts of the little butterflies from Heartstopper. So that's exactly what I felt like when I saw that going out of Nico's head. Is it Nico and Crystal falling in love when they at first sight? Is that what it's supposed to indicate? I wonder if I'm sure we'll see that later on in the series as well.
Absolutely. The reason for this split, it's all been preceded by them going to a milkshake diner. I love this whole setup where everyone in the diner is kind of looking at Crystal because it looks like she's speaking to herself.
Yes.
And she kind of gets very self-conscious about it. Goes to the toilet, and then suddenly we are reintroduced to the demonic possessor that is David. And here we find out he is the one that took her memories. Here he says that Crystal's talents make her very special. And this great kind of style here. I love the three big eyeballs. I love the fact that, she's walking out of the toilet after sort of just splashing her face with water, and it's into this sort of darkened chamber where you can't see the edges. It's really good. But ultimately, when she comes out of this, she's in the middle of the malt shop, and Edwin and Charles have had to kind of hurry her out of there because she was speaking to David the Demon in front of everyone who are kind of taking videos and so on. And as they leave, the argument breaks out because Crystal is scared, and we have Charles saying, "Do you not see she's still scared? You know, this is the case," again, reiterating that the case isn't over for her because they haven't dealt with the demon properly.
Exactly.
And he has her memories. But it also transpires that she, to some degree, let him in willingly because of her talents.
Yeah.
She wasn't...
To some degree.
Yeah.
Not just to some degree. She absolutely fell for him and let him in, even knowingly that he was a demon. So,
but she let him in and then he wouldn't leave.
Exactly.
So that was the issue.
Yeah.
And again, because of being a medium, she was kind of used to this. So it didn't initially frighten her off, is how she kind of describes it. And that's possibly the reason why she let him in, as well as that she fell in love with him.
Well, yeah, it's a toxic boyfriend. Sometimes you can't tell them early on in a relationship, which is what happened here with Crystal. He obviously is able to use his wiles to get this. It doesn't sound like it's the first time that Demon Dave has done this to a woman in the past.
No.
He's done it here to Crystal, and she thought she was safe because she's dealt with the occult and dealt with demons and dealt with ghosts in the past. So she felt she was safe. And then when she realized she wasn't, he wouldn't leave. So, that's where she is right now. And that's, again, it's Edwin kind of going, but hang on a second. That's kind of a key piece of information to let us know that you let the demon in. It makes it much more difficult to get rid of him and know exactly what he could do to you. So it seems like Dave could do more to her because he's stolen her memories. So, so it drives another wedge between them and lets Edwin go off on his own. But I do like that there is a moment between Charles and Crystal while they're left alone in the house, where Charles talks about what he's been doing for the many years when she's worried that she'll never be able to reconnect with the family, that she doesn't even know whether she has or not. He says, look, we all want to connect with our families. I sit here once a week and check in on my parents and see how they're doing, even though my father wasn't someone that had a great connection with. I still check in on them. I still want to make sure that they're all alive and all okay. And hey, they're in their old age now, and all they do is just sit and watch TV and eat biscuits, but at least I know they're still there. So
absolutely. Yeah. And I think as well, when Edwin returns, there is a little bit of, in a sense, drawing a line in the sand about her, at least just airing what is niggling at Edwin. You know, Crystal says that she wants to help, and Edwin kind of really says why these cases matter. It's because him and Charles didn't matter in life. That's his, feeling, because of, he was taken young. He probably, I guess the fact that he was put out to pasture at a boarding school as well. He wasn't entirely sure what affection his parents had for him.
Exactly.
And so
that's part of the story that you get in the Sandman comics. He's left on his own over Christmas holidays. He's left there all the time. And he is brutalized, beaten before he's even realized who he is as a person. He's so young when he's murdered. So he's also spent decades in hell. So, this entire experience that Edwin's gone through is what makes him want to help other people with these kind of questions and investigate the deaths of other people. That's what the Dead Boy Detectives usually do. Yeah. So, it's the driving force behind everything they do.
And it's why these cases matter, not because of that, and because he's doing them with Charles. And interestingly, we don't necessarily find out too much about Charles's backstory here.
Yeah, we don't really find out much about Charles's death. It's really more about Edwin's death. But I suppose the big thing to take from it is what Edwin says. Both of them died, and nobody investigated. Nobody found their bodies. Nobody was interested after they died from their perspective. Nobody was looking for them. Yeah. Nobody found their murderers. Nobody found who killed them. So, that's the big thing. They were forgotten in time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But let us get on to our final case note, which is the saving of Becky from Esther the Witch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the final kind of moments, because we have the standoff really at the house of Esther, where Crystal has set it up so she gets called away from the house. This witch, they're now meddling in areas that aren't that great to meddle in, I suppose.
No, Edwin's a bit nervous. Like, witches are dangerous.
They are.
You know? I think he says, I know someone that was turned into a plastic bottle, and they're still like that and can feel everything, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But they leave Crystal outside because that's exactly as John's described. That's what Edwin says to her. Look, you're human. A lot more damage can be done to you than can be done to the two of us. We're dead. So they go into the house to investigate. They find Becky. She's being stored in a magical void underneath the house, which they find pretty quickly. But again, this is another one of those ones where the tone is, you're just not really unsure because it's been relatively upbeat, apart from some of the dialogue. And then you have Edwin crawling around in what looks like the bones of hundreds and hundreds of girls that have died, that have been children, that have died at the hands of Esther. So he does find Becky in here and is able to get her out. And again, we see Charles's use of the bottomless bag of tricks, being able to get out the whole pulley system to get them out of there pretty easily.
And Becky as well.
Exactly.
She's bundled into the bag. Because she can. Yeah, I like this. And we find out that Esther is a collector. She kind of uses children or the young, to keep herself young. And it just immediately threw me back to Neil Gaiman's Stardust as well, where you have that same
the witches
kind of premise with the witches, exactly.
Who take the youth to keep themselves youthful. Yeah.
But Esther does return, seemingly kind of clued in, really, that the joint was being cased, really, by the Dead Boy detectives and Crystal. And so paralyzes Crystal, who, in order to get away, in order effectively to tackle Esther, we have a combination of Crystal connecting with her memories, with Esther's memories through touch, and then Charles possessing her in order to rescue them. So, you know, certainly the possession here is maybe not the best move to do. He gets flung out, actually, of Esther pretty quickly, because she's banging her head against the side of a post on her house. And actually we see, you know, ultimately she's very powerful in that Charles quite quickly is depossessed from Esther. And prior to that, you know, she is armed with a metal cane and seems to have no trouble flinging them across the front garden of her house.
Well, it's an iron cane, which we learned was one of the rules, that ghosts can be damaged by iron. We learned that right back at the start of the episode, when that's the iron knife that they used on the World War One veterans.
Exactly.
So we know iron does damage. She knows that as well, and that's what she's made her cane out of. So if any ghosts do attack her, she's able to defend herself pretty easily. But I do think Crystal using her power to reach inside her mind, you know, Crystal even says herself, this is going to hurt you and me because you're not a willing participant here, basically. So the two of them kind of exploding into her mind, I thought was a really good effect as well. That's cool.
Yeah. And Esther kind of is, you know, as they're making their escape from, the front of Esther's house, Esther's kind of like, you know, you really didn't want to do that.
Yes.
So I'm not entirely sure we will have seen the last of Esther here.
Oh, definitely not. No. I think she's a major character in the show in here. I think we're going to see a lot more of her. I think particularly because she knows who these guys are pretty quickly as well. She knows them by name. She's able to call that out. And I love the jealousy of her, where she's kind of, as you mentioned, she's taking the beauty of youth to keep herself youthful, and then looks at Edwin and Charles and goes, hang on a second, you get to stay alive and stay young forever. What's the problem here? I wish I could be like that, effectively. So I thought that was a funny little moment in there. But overall, that closes the case. They've saved Becky. I love that they just took a moment in the episode to have Crystal wipe all the bad things that happened from Becky's mind, so Becky can go back without the trauma of what she'd been subjected to in that pocket universe, or that little world that she was being kept in.
And hopefully with the suggestion to stay away from Esther.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that possession ultimately we see coming home to roost
Yes, we do.
right at the end in the lost and found department of the afterlife as well, where the possession is ultimately reported to some chief supernatural person.
It's the night nurse.
Okay,
John,
the
is who
night
that
nurse.
is. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Played
that.
by the very well known to us Ruth Connell, who we know from Supernatural.
Absolutely recognised her from Supernatural, yeah. And she just finishes the episode off with, found the two naughty boys.
Oh, there you are, you naughty boys. Yes, exactly. So she knows exactly who she's looking for now after the possession. So, that again, something else to set up the season. It's one of the things about the first episode of a show, always, especially one that has such deep connections to a universe like Sandman. There's going to be lots of things that they're setting up for the season here. This is an 8-episode season, so we know that there's going to be a big story that's going to be running through those 8 episodes. So you have to establish everything in the first episode, and there's lots to establish there. So I'm glad the way they did it with that little cliffhanger. That if you're watching it on Netflix, 10 seconds later, you probably know the payoff of what's happening there, or it appears in the next episode. But John, is there any other notes, anything else you wanted to bring up from the episode that we haven't talked about in our major points?
No, not really, not from me. I think I'm still sort of trying to get into the swing of the series, really. Like, only really seen the first 2 episodes so far. And I have to say, from my side, absolutely enjoyed them. I'm kind of really nicely surprised at this. And I'm glad that there's a real solid sort of addition here to the Sandman universe, at least what it seems like from this first outing for me.
Yeah.
I would give this 4 massive eyeballs out of 5. I just really enjoyed meeting Edwin and Charles, Crystal, loved Esther. I loved the potty-mouthed kitties.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed, just the intrigue of the setup. And I think you could really sense that this was a setup episode here.
Yeah.
David the Demon, and of course then the Night Nurse, which I always remember being a medicine as a kid. I think it was like a cough mixture.
Yeah.
That's so, but the Night Nurse.
See, I've just got Night Nurse from the Netflix Marvel shows, of course.
Exactly.
So I wouldn't have known the character's name except for I looked it up for the episode.
So for me, 4 giant eyeballs out of 5.
Very good. Very good. That's very positive. I'm enjoying it, definitely, and I think it's a fun show so far, but I think coming from the Sandman, which went very dark over the course of its season that it's had out so far, there were some very dark episodes I wouldn't recommend to anybody that gets chills from horror shows. I didn't know what to expect at all from this show. And it's playful, it's fun. I can see the Netflix, and there's some other Netflix shows that are similar to this. I think Lock and Key would be a show that I feel has a similar kind of style to it, that plays a bit in the adult show and plays a little bit in the teenage show. So I think it means you could probably have this with a whole family sitting down in front of it, watching it, along with their older teenage kids, maybe.
And I mean, I think there are certainly dark strands through this.
There are,
maybe that will get darker as it goes through, but I think the fact that there is a lightness to it as well is good. There's something different there.
And maybe, of course, it's just because we're getting old, John. When I was 14, I was reading The Sandman. I was reading those comic books with their adult content, with their adult conversations, and the language that's in there, and the sex that's in there, and all of that stuff. Maybe it's because we're getting old that we think a show for teenagers shouldn't include the language that's in there, or the sex that's in the, well, there's no sex in the show so far, but the violence that's in there, the gruesomeness. Maybe it's just us. But if you think about it, when we were watching those shows and the movies at the time and reading the books at the time at 14, 15, 16 years old, it wouldn't have crossed our mind that it's not for us.
Well, I mean, you might be getting old. I am eternally youthful.
That is true.
Best.
Yes, absolutely, John. You are reversing in age as it goes on. So 10 years podcasting and you look 10 years younger.
Well, yes, maybe.
Great stuff.
Forever youthful in my mind, I guess.
Exactly. But we would love to hear your thoughts about the Dead Boy Detectives. Whatever way you're watching it, you can send your thoughts into us at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. As we say, we aren't watching fully ahead. We aren't watching the full season before we record our podcast. So just mark whether you're commenting on later episodes or whether you're commenting on episode by episode on your emails, or you can join us over in our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/TV podcast industries, where you can leave your thoughts on each of the individual spoiler post episodes that will be up there by now as we're releasing the episode. Thanks so much for joining us for our coverage of The Dead Boy Detectives episode 1. We'll be back to cover episode 2, The Case of the Dandelion Shrine, and episode 3, The Case of the Devlin House, next time on TV Podcast Industries. That should be a lot of fun, shouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Good stuff. Yes, thank you so much, fellow dreamers, for joining us on this first episode of our podcast, looking at the Dead Boy Detectives. But of course, until next time, keep watching, keep listening, and of course, keep dreaming.
Bye.
Bye.